Alright, so can everyone kind of see, or at least hear me good? So, as Jen mentioned, one of the themes of this year we want to do aquascaping, but we wanted to give kind of a choice of what you guys wanted to see, whether you want to do Dutch, Iwagumi, nature aquarium style. I know there are other styles out there. These are the main three, and that way we can really focus on a specific thing, whatever everyone wants to do. Then the aquascaping contest will be like this too. So, sorry it's a little off, but basically I just want to talk about what each of the layouts styles are, what their basic principles are for each of them. I'm going to show a bunch of examples, and then any questions you have along the way, please just chime up. So, first one we'll do is the Dutch style.
Can I ask a question as we're going into this? Just in thinking about the contest, and because it's first year, what's the size range that people can do for the contest?
I think this year the contest is open to whatever you have.
Okay,
so we're focused. That was more focused on the style. In the past, we had done orders of 2.5 gallon tanks, so everyone had the same size.
Okay.
And there's
but it can be a smaller tank. It doesn't have to be a...
Exactly. It's more important of how you execute what you're doing in the tank rather than what the size is. I think if you look at any of the contests out there now, you see great examples that in the small tanks that blow away the larger tanks, and vice versa. The size isn't really as big of an issue. There are enough plants out there that you can use in either case. So I guess the main thing about Dutch is that there's not really any hardscape, or very little hardscape if there is. So there's a little bit of background. It's actually the oldest, I think, aquascaping style. Dutch Netherlands in the 1930s, they were doing this. It's amazing to think that they were growing plants successfully enough back then. Modeling after a lot of their outdoor gardens, very trimmed, pruned, neatly organized. One of the things that most Dutch aquascapes have that are characteristic is that they have distinct rows, either to front to back, left to right, right to left, some kind of pathway or that they'll have. In addition, unlike a lot of the other styles, they'll also focus on covering up any of the glass, using up all the available space. So rather than just a black background, they'll have a moss wall or Java fern growing back there. Same with some of the sides of the walls. And then since these tanks are meant to be kind of centerpieces of a room, they'll do what Mike is doing, and they'll actually build a custom cabinet around the tank, oftentimes, traditionally. Obviously, you can have a Dutch tank in your fish room, but historically, it would be built in, would be the centerpiece of the room. And then one other main difference is fish species. In a Dutch tank, it's perfectly okay and seen often to have large, showy fish, your discus, your large angelfish, in a 50-gallon, 75-gallon tank, because the tank itself is meant to be a centerpiece. So are the fish, as opposed to some other styles where the fish are kind of just supposed to blend into the aquascape itself. And for that reason, to keep it interesting, they like to put fish in all levels. So you have your bottom dwellers, your mid one, your big, middle of the range ones, and then any of the schoolers around as well. So there are some kind of prototypical plants that are used in Dutch style. I won't go through all of them, but the main one, Lobelia cardinalis, that's where they do the streets oftentimes from front to back. Bacopa caroliniana, Hamania gracilis, and pretty much any of your stem plants that you can think of, your Liligias, your Rotalas, your Sororus, Hygros, and they will even use sword plants too, which is not seen in a lot of the other styles. So, just going to go through a couple examples. Right here you can see a couple of things that I was talking about. You've got your kind of row of plants that are trimmed low in the front and go all the way to the back. And in the back then you see there's the moss wall. Similarly, there's kind of another pathway through here. But everything is pretty well trimmed. The resolution isn't hard to see, but you see it's no problem having a big sword plant right here in the middle, or They got hydrocotyle growing down this kind of trimmed along the side of the aquarium. Everything is well trimmed. You notice a lotus plant up in front. I mean, lotus plants, they want to go to the surface. They're meticulously trimming them to keep them down to stay only this height. And eventually the plant will realize, hey, if I want to survive and keep any of my leaves, I better only send them up this tall. Not really. I mean, a lot of plants are adaptable in this way. And I mean, lotuses, these are beautiful. But then again, you let it go to the surface and it will literally take up this much space. And they're keeping them very small. Let's see if there's anything else in this one. Any questions so far? Okay. So then, and these aren't all perfect examples, but I thought, here's one where they're actually using a little bit of foreground sand. This is George Farmer, who's if you've never seen any of his other scapes, he's very talented. But he's got a little bit of the row here of the Cardinalis, and then also this is Vesuvius. So some of the newer plants that you wouldn't necessarily see in some of the traditional hobbies, but all trimmed very well, taking up. I mean, you don't see a whole lot of negative space in this aquascape. Negative space is just, rather than what you're putting in the tank, you're leaving some empty space to draw focus to the centerpiece in a lot of other styles. In here, you're using color and leaf shapes. So they're really using contrast. So right here is a contrast, or back here, the contrast of the leaf shape of the sword plant in comparison to some of these finer leaf plants around it, that's really the focal point. And of course, if you're thinking of some of the other talks that we've done about the golden ratio, it's about a third over, what is it, 1.6 something 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 ratio in this end of the tank. Here's another one. This one I thought was fantastic. We pulled this from the AGA competition, I think, in 2007. Again, I'm not sure if this is a sword plant or a Blissa albertia. Yeah, and but in some of the other styles, you wouldn't see this. I mean, it's kind of, that's definitely, your eye goes right there, and everything else in this tank is, well, I guess the foreground I can't tell here. That's probably glosso, but your stem plants. So if you can imagine the time it takes to trim this tank and to keep this shorter here and then this level shorter here, it's incredible. It's, I don't know, I really like this one. But again, the use of color, look at how many red plants are in these scapes, as opposed to when we look at some of the other styles where you might just have a little splash of red somewhere. I mean, they're really using a lot of red plants, which is fun.
One thing I find interesting about this one is that it does have some negative space.
It does.
Which, at least to my eyes, is quite pleasing, and you get that very much triangular kind of layout approach that you see a lot in nature aquariums.
Right. And it definitely helps draw the attention then down to the kind of awkward-looking Blissa or Blisa plant. So here's maybe more of a traditional one. You've got Java fern in the back. I think that's the Lobelia cardinalis going. It almost looks plastic here.
Yeah.
Deep reds going back. You've got the, I guess, water sprite or deformis going front to back. The Copa caroliniana. That's probably the Amania gracilis. And then Downoy, so this is a relatively new plant, but or the Pogostem and Helferi, but nicely done. You can imagine the amount of effort that it takes to maintain all of these plants. I'm not sure what this one is from the resolution. Is it?
I think so.
Wow, to keep it that short, that's an effort.
Or are they just replanting the tops for the photo shoot?
Maybe. I mean, they're always going to be photographic tricks, right? Pretty neat. So something else, just to give kind of a full impact, this next tank isn't what I would call the nicest tank I've ever seen. It's not a bad-looking tank, but I actually really like, it was a thread on APC from Where's Bunny Slippers? I'm not sure what it is, but where they took a picture every couple of weeks.
That's from South Africa.
Is it?
Yeah.
Okay. But you can see when they're planting, there's not a single rock here. They're just planting stems, all in bunches. You go the next week, they're filling out a little bit. I'm sure they'll trim. They've probably done a couple of trims. It fills out a little bit more. It might have changed. The foreground is starting to come in. Still, it hasn't really taken form at all. Taken a little bit more form. This is getting a little ratty. But then eventually they must have decided, hey, maybe I do want some hardscape. So, fine. But you can really see that the plants at this point, I think it's about 6 weeks in, have really started to take form to the fact that they can really focus on pruning them back into the bushes. And I think this was the last picture he posted before I put it on here. But you can just, it's definitely different from what we've preached as far as aquascaping in the past, because we focus a lot on the nature aquarium style, which we'll talk about here in a second. But yep.
Having done Dutch for a number of years, way back when, a couple things I want to point out is they generally take their inspiration from formal gardens in Europe. I mean, obviously, since they originated in Europe. And if anybody is ever interested in doing it, what a lot of people would do is they would just go to their public gardens. For me, up in my area, go to Longwood Gardens or something like that and look at their perennial beds. A lot of the public gardens are landscaped the same way. Big blocks of a single type of plant, some sort of street arrangement going in with it, as you mentioned earlier. And then, of course, maximizing using the full palette of color and texture. And it's all about having a single plant as your focal point, and then everything else works off of that one plant using the broadest variety of color and texture you can. So, and as far as work, it's an ungodly amount. The really well-maintained ones, they're in there for probably an hour and a half every day, 7 days a week.
I vote not for that.
And a lot of work.
Yeah, and I think you can mitigate some of that based on the plant choices that you make, but still, it's going to be a fair amount of effort.
I mean, and tough.
No, you get some of these stems. You get some of the alternanthras, the hydrophilas,
the
talas, the Rigias. You got them high CO2, high fertilizer. I mean, you can almost literally stand there and watch them grow, and you can see and you can notice growth from day to day.
Yeah.
So by nature of that, I mean, it's a tremendous amount of work in maintaining it.
Right.
Don't listen to him.
Jim, when you did it, did you actually replant all of your tops? Did you just top the plants, or were you actually digging up the roots every time and replanting? Because I think with a soil-based substrate or even aqua soil, this might be hard. I mean, it really requires digging up a lot of stems and putting them back in, right?
Most of it was trimming. The stuff in the foreground, you try to pick stuff that's low to start with, and then you just trim the crap out.
Yeah, I'll give you a shortcut method to that. Valerie, a friend of mine down from Texas, the way she did hers was she'd take a bunch of stem plants, she'd tie a little plant tie at the bottom, and she'd just drop them in the tank. And then every so often you'd pull it up, clip off the bottoms, tie it back, and drop it back in. So you get the precision of the height that you need, no problems. You don't have to dig up anything. You can pull it out, you just put it back in. Don't listen to him.
Although some people want to down anyway,
exactly.
So you have to be careful.
Stems are, are
disrupting things.
easily uptake nutrients from the water column, so they don't really need to be rooted. All of them have weak root systems as is, most of them anyway. So it works out, and it's only for a contest. You can get rid of it.
Which would have a substantially smaller group of people in it.
But we definitely wanted to show, especially given that it's one of the older styles.